So in this episode, I want to talk about boundaries. Boundaries are really important, and they're often quite difficult to kind of have boundaries, to be able to say no, to be able to kind of step away from something or somebody at the point where it feels right to step away. And I think one of the things that we'll often face in terms of that struggle of putting boundaries up, like effective boundaries, proportional boundaries, is that sense that, we're not nice people if we say no. We're not nice people if we move away from a person or a thing or a situation because it doesn't feel right. And yet, I experienced the same thing today. So, I do get it. I was stood in the city centre, and somebody saw my phone. I had my phone out, and the person said, a young man came up to me. I say young, probably about 25, and he said, "I've got 1% left in my phone. Can I borrow your phone?" And obviously, he might well have been being sincere, but if he wasn't being sincere, that's the easiest way to steal somebody's phone, isn't it? Just to see if somebody would be daft enough just to hand the thing over. And so I really didn't want to hand my phone over. And yet at the same time, I didn't want to be perceived as a horrible person who doesn't lend their phone to somebody in need. And so it actually took a lot for me to say no. And I felt quite bad after it, because he may well have been sincere, but then I would have felt right foolish if he'd simply taken my phone and ran. He looked a quicker runner than I am. So even though it seems kind of a sensible thing to say no to a complete stranger who can run faster than you can, who wants to get your phone to be handed over to them, I still felt kind of rotten. I still felt kind of bad. Because we want to be nice people, don't we? And yet, when you look at some of the research around boundaries, it's interesting, because Brené Brown, who you might have heard of, she's got her own Netflix special. She's best-selling author of 5 different books, and she talks about boundaries because she studied them. She researched them. It's what she does. And she said she went into the research thinking that, the nice people are the ones who don't have boundaries. And she found that it was the exact opposite. All the people who kind of had good feelings and good wishes for other members of the human race, they were all the most boundaried rather. And she found this an interesting thing until when she dug into the questions and the data that she was collecting, she realised what the link was. The people who are boundaried don't carry resentment about other people, because they know what's okay for them and they draw that line in exactly that place. And so there's nobody who is doing stuff to them that is not okay. Now, if someone's doing stuff to you that's not okay, whether it's taking your time or, putting on you in some way, in a way that doesn't feel okay to you, then naturally you're going to feel some sort of resentment to the fact that that's what's happening, that's the situation you're in, that you're really wanting to draw the line but don't feel as though you're able to. And so resentment breeds. But the boundaried people, because they drew their boundary exactly on the place where things were not okay for them, then nothing was happening to them that they were allowing that wasn't okay for them. And so consequently, they were full of love for the rest of the human race, because the rest of the human race were not consistently doing things to hurt them. And so when you look at it in this lens, those of us who struggle with boundaries, those of us who let people walk all over that line, way past that line into the part of life that is not okay, putting us in situations where it's not okay, but we we don't want to speak out because we want to be seen as nice. We want to be nice. Well, those of us who are like that are likely carrying all sorts of resentments. Whereas the boundary people, well, it's easy for them to love everybody because nobody's hurting them. And it's very difficult to feel good things about someone who's hurting you in some way. And so I'm hoping that this kind of frame, which I'm grateful to Brené Brown for, this kind of way of looking at boundaries and seeing them as not something that takes away your niceness, but actually is the gateway to being a nice, loving person. I'm hoping that that reframe will allow you to start putting those boundaries up yourself. If you're one of those people who find it really difficult to say no, to draw the kind of separation that you need, who maybe don't even appreciate, where would the boundary be, then hopefully you can take that tip from Brené Brown, because the boundary is exactly at the point where this is okay for me becomes this is not okay for me. And so if you listen to yourself, every fibre of your being in those moments will start to feel uncomfortable because this is not okay for me. And when you notice that this is not okay for you, then you can actually draw that boundary and create the distance that you need. And the key thing is that won't make you a horrible person for doing that. That'll make you a nice person. You'll be full of love in your heart for other people because none of them are doing things that are not okay for you. None of them are doing things that you're in such a way that you're permitting them to hurt you. Now, that young man, I have a certain amount of empathy, the one who asked for my phone. I don't know, maybe he needed my phone, maybe he was a good guy. But can you imagine the amount of resentment I'd have felt both towards him and anger at myself if I'd have handed it over and he'd have gone running down the street? So I'm hoping this is helpful. I'm hoping this is something that will enable you to put in some of the boundaries that you need to ensure that things are okay for you and that you can speak up at the very moment that they become not okay so that they become okay again. So that's all for this episode. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to work with me, I'm Alun Parry from the Liverpool Psychotherapy practice. You can find me on liverpoolpsychotherapy.co.uk and I'll see you on the next episode.